Check out this great testimony.
Growing up, I was born into a house where, very, very blessed mom and dad, but they didn't have, God wasn't a very big part, I guess, of our household growing up. Mom and dad, born again, saved as far as I know. I mean, they've told me they went to church as kids. They grew up in church families. But for me, I didn't see a lot of God in our house. It was really, I wouldn't say that God was absent. It just wasn't a focus. It wasn't a priority in our house necessarily, I think. Maybe we'd say a prayer every once in a while before we'd eat dinner or something like that. But very seldom do we ever go to church. I could probably count on my hand on one, maybe two at most, the amount of times I remember my mom and dad being in the church. And so it was just something that they didn't believe they needed to do and go to church. So on the other side, my grandparents on both sides, my grandmother on my mom's side, more or less, she was very much into the church, and her husband, or my grandfather, he didn't go to church. It was not his thing. But on my dad's side, my grandparents, they were very influential and kind of, I wouldn't say making sure I went to church, but they just sort of, I guess I would call it, they were just there for me and encouraged it and afforded me the opportunity really to go to church more growing up. So it was sort of a contrast between my parents and my grandparents growing up. I just remember from a very early on age, like my dad was a truck driver. He was on the road a lot. Mom, they both had, both my parents, they were about 20 years old when they had me, so they were young. And so I don't know if they really knew exactly what they're doing, and what parent does know what they're doing when they have their first one. I was about the same age when I had my first son, and I certainly didn't know what I was doing. So my mom would say that we grew up together. And so, again, she was 20, probably getting ready to turn 21-ish when I was a baby. And so, again, just kind of grew up. Mom was awesome, Dad was awesome, but Dad was on the road a lot. So, again, God just wasn't necessarily a priority. The house that I like to talk about, like the house that I grew up in, the very loving house. There was always love there. I just remember my parents at a younger age, when I was little, there was a lot of fighting. Again, they were kind of growing up, trying to figure out marriage, all those things. So it was a little bit different. You go to my grandparents' house, again, on my dad's side, that's where I grew up a lot, or spent a lot of my time growing up, just because I loved it there. It was just a different environment. Again, my house was great, but it was just different. This was partying and stuff. Parents they were young. They had their friends over, drinking, smoking, and stuff like that. And I enjoyed that as a kid. It was awesome. It was fun. It was nothing bad. It was just when I'd go to my grandparents' house, it was just different. It was just calm. It was more a loving environment. It wasn't as much going on. So for some reason, as a young kid, I didn't like loud noises. I didn't like a lot of stuff like that. And so in any case, I just kind of liked the calmness of my grandparents' house. And so Sunday mornings, they would come pick me up to go to church on Sunday mornings. And so I just remember them driving up in the driveway Sunday morning, and mom and dad would get me dressed, and I'd go to church, and it was what I wanted to do. And so I grew up in the church a lot growing up. But again, just sort of that contrast between grandparents and then my mom and dad, or, our house, I guess. So probably as I got a little bit older, growing into my I guess 10 years old, something like that, probably a little bit younger than that, I would go to my grandparents on the weekends' house, because that's where I wanted to go. I'd go to their house on Friday, and I'd stay until Sunday, and then I'd go home, and then I'd stay at home all week. But when I was with my grandparents, we were going to go to church. There was no question about it. That was what their thing was. They were going Wednesday night, we're going Sunday, we're going Sunday night. If I were going to be with them, we were just going to go to church. And so, again, I just enjoyed being with them. And I think a big thing of it was, they were older. They had my dad and his brother. There was only two of them. They were 16 years apart. So my dad, I think I went back and did some math, and I may be wrong on it, but my grandparents probably would have been in their early 40s, I guess, maybe, when they had my dad. So they were older. So by the time I was born, they were probably close to their 60s. Oh, wow. So it was a little bit, again, a lot different. They had already raised two boys, and so I guess I wouldn't say that they had it figured out, but they kind of knew what it took to raise a kid, I guess, and my parents still sort of trying to figure it out. So as we go on later on, again, probably 9, 10 years old, going to church on Wednesday nights and very involved in the church and stuff like that. But I think it was going back around 11 years old, I think, is when I finally figured out that I needed to be saved. I remember we used to go on Wednesday nights, we would have this thing called Royal Ambassadors. And it was this program for young men growing up in the church. And so Wednesday nights, it was our Royal Ambassador thing. And it was just this one Wednesday night where we're sitting there, and I'd believed in God, knew some Bible story, grew up in the church for the most part a little bit, going with my grandparents. But somebody told me, it's like, well, if you haven't been saved. I was like, well, okay, I'm still going to heaven, right? And they're like, no, you're not going to heaven if you haven't been saved. And it just kind of rocked my world. I was like, that's not, what? Like I thought I was going to heaven. I've done everything I'm supposed to do, I believe. All those things. And they're like, well, no, you haven't been saved. And so I remember that night just going out, and I don't remember the guy's name, but I could see, I know his face. I don't know if he's still around or not, but he took me out. We had a gymnasium where we met at, and it was like upstairs, and was where our classroom was at. And he took me out, and we kind of sat on the steps, and that was the time I actually prayed. Again, I think I was probably like 11 years old maybe, and prayed and received Christ. And it was just this overwhelming just calmness and peace that I have never felt ever to that point. And so I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was saved in that moment, like the Holy Spirit washed over me. And I didn't understand it at the time. I didn't know what it meant, really. I just knew that I was just trying to go to heaven. That's all I knew. I just didn't want to go to the other place. And so it was that moment where I knew I was saved, but the enemy really, really came on strong at that same time. Again, 11 years old, through puberty, girls are starting to catch your attention, and other things are starting to catch your attention. And again, I just grew up around, I wouldn't say it was not a bad family, but I heard language from friends and cousins and things like that. And so, of course, I was well versed in some of those words. And as a kid going to church, we would play basketball Wednesday nights before church. And so it was like the very next week or 2 weeks after I'd been saved, we were out there playing basketball. I'm just cussing, just acting stupid, and one of the kids, I just remember them saying, like, didn't you just get saved? And I was like, yeah, and it still sticks with me this day. It kind of bothered me. And as I look back, I just know that it was Satan, the devil's he found out, he's like, hey, I'm losing, or I lost him. And I really need to get back into his life. And so he just really started attacking. And I kind of started the point where I think it started veering away from church a little bit more. It was maybe a few years after that, starting to get into teenage years where now the girls are more important and friends are more important. And so church wasn't a priority anymore. I get to 6th grade, I don't know how old I would have been, but I met my best friend growing up. And he grew up in a household that was completely different from mine. His household, they were very, I wouldn't say strict, but they had to go to church on Wednesday nights. They had to go to church on Sunday. And so growing up in my household where it was like church wasn't a priority to meeting him, where he had to go to church, it was kind of like I felt bad for him, and so he was a bit more of a rebel sometimes, I guess, because maybe he was trying to rebel from his parents. And we go to middle school, and we're just a bunch of jerks when we go to middle school. I mean, 7th, 8th graders were just, it's the worst age ever for boys and girls. But I think it was my 7th grade year, we'd become good friends, and we didn't hang out a lot during the summers and stuff. I had my 2 cousins. We were almost exactly 1 year apart. We're all born in April. My older cousin, he was born in 1980. I was born in 81. And then my next cousin, he was born in 82. And we're all in the month of April, 1 year apart. So my 7th grade year, we're just being little idiots, and we're going like on vacation, and we figure out, hey, if we start stealing stuff, we can get stuff for free. And we would go to the store with money in our pocket, but we're like, I want to keep my money and I want the stuff too. And so we just started out. My older cousin, we kind of just figured out at the same time. We didn't really necessarily talk to each other and say, hey, let's start stealing stuff. It's just, for some reason, we just kind of figured that out, that if we stole something, we started out with stupid little stuff like stealing pens from the grocery store or something. You're like, oh, cool, I can get stuff for free, or candy, whatever. And So we kind of started doing it together. And that summer, we'd go to the beach. I remember going to Myrtle Beach. We go to Myrtle Beach every year. Grew up in South Carolina, the upstate. And Myrtle Beach was where we'd go on vacation. And my dad had gotten a camper, and he would take the camper down to the beach in the summertime, and it would just stay there for like, I don't know, 2 or 3 months. And the families would go, different families, both sides of our family would go, and they'd go for like a week, and they would pay for that week or whatever. Well, so it would work out to where I'd get to go to the beach like maybe 2 times that year. I'd go with my parents, and my cousin would come with me, and then his parents would go, and I'd go with him, and so it was kind of cool. Well, we'd gone with my parents down to the beach, and we were just like, we're just going to steal whatever we can. We didn't care. We stole so much stuff, it was just ridiculous. Just stupid. And I just remember going to Sam's Club, I think it was, and they used to have an aisle of just cartons of cigarettes. And we just go down there, and you could just open them up, and we'd stick them in our pockets, and just idiots. And but I think it was towards the end of that summer, maybe the school year was getting ready to start or just had started. We had figured out, hey, we could steal cassette tapes. I know I'm dating myself a little bit, but we figured out we could steal cassette tapes from Walmart, and they had like this big giant plastic thing on them, and that was supposed to keep you from stealing it. We figured out a way that we could take that plastic thing off, and we could just stick the tapes in our pockets and leave. Well, we had gone to Walmart earlier that day. Me and my older cousin, we had gone, and my parents were going to, I think they were going to do something that Saturday night. They were going to the races or something, and usually that would have been something I would have wanted to go with my parents to do. But I was like, oh, we're going to get free stuff. And so we had talked our younger cousin into going with us. And we're like, hey, we're going to go to Walmart. We're going to steal some stuff. So earlier that day, me and my older cousin had gone to Walmart. We got some stuff. We'd gotten away with it. And so we go back later that night, like, again, a bunch of idiots, thinking that nobody's going to know. And they had caught on to us. And what we were doing was we were taking those cassettes, and they had, like I said, the big plastic things on them. We'd take them off, and then we'd just leave them in the bathroom, leaving evidence right there. And so we got busted that night, all 3 of us. Unfortunately, it was my younger cousin, the first time he'd ever done it. And my parents, they were gone. So my aunt, both of my aunts ended up coming. It was my younger cousin, mom, and then, of course, my older cousin's mom, who I was staying with. They came to pick us up. They called the cops, and I just remember we going into the back room. They take us to the back. This is 3 just juvenile delinquents, I guess, in the back. Tell us to empty all our pockets. We know we're busted. There's no way we're going to. We pull out probably $40 worth between all 3 of us, just money that we had, and then we were still stealing stuff. So I just say that just to say that I'm so thankful that I got busted that night, because we were going down a path that was not going to end well. I would have just kept stealing, honestly, until I would have gotten caught. And so we got caught. Thankfully, for my sake, my parents weren't able to come pick me up. I had to deal with the wrath afterwards, but they had talked about, they'd asked us if they wanted, or the cops had asked both of my aunts if they wanted us to take us to juvenile hall that night. And that scared the living daylights out of us, because we were like, oh man, this is a big deal. And but my aunt, she was like, well, I can't tell him to go. His parents aren't here, so I'm take him home. And so we ended up not having to go to jail that night, but we should have. And but it scared us straight, I think, for the most part. My older cousin ended up getting a little bit more trouble afterwards. Again, I think it's just one of those things. And that whole 8th grade year, I was just a big jerk. I was just trying to get in trouble. It's just being rebellious, I guess. So anyway, I get into my high school years, and now my walk with God is pretty much non-existent. I'm not going to church anymore. My grandparents were never pushy. They wanted me to go to church, and they would always be like, hey, you can come to church with us. And maybe I'd go on a Wednesday night or maybe an occasional Sunday. But since my parents, it wasn't a priority to them, it wasn't really a priority to me anymore. My priority now is kind of hanging out with friends and doing whatever I wanted to. And I remember we would go like steal cigarettes, all kinds of different places, and just doing stupid stuff. And so I go into my 8th grade year, still have my best friend. He's not really doing around doing any of that kind of stuff. But I think we got into my freshman year, high school, and we were still going to the same school. And he kind of stuck by my side the whole time. I don't know why. I guess we just had some connections or whatever. But I think it was probably ninth grade year I started to get a little bit straightened out a little bit. Like I'm not getting in much trouble anymore. My grades aren't that great, but I wasn't doing anything that, bad anymore. And then getting into my 10th grade year, I think it was, met a girlfriend and, first real relationship type stuff. And so now my focus is 100% on that, and now I've got my driver's license, and so I can go drive. I've got freedom. I can do whatever I want for the most part. My parents didn't let me do whatever I wanted, but I felt like I had freedom. And so, again, that time church was not even, God was not even anywhere in the picture whatsoever at this point. So I think it's my 11th grade year, had a bad breakup, some bad things happened with that girlfriend that I'm so thankful that God's a forgiving God, because there was just some bad things that happened. But going in my 11th grade year, my best friend again in high school, he had been going to church and he invited me to go to church with him. Well, he went to a Church of God church and I went to a Baptist church. And so we always kind of make fun of each other. You go to Baptist, he's like, yeah, I'll go to Church of God. And I didn't know what Church of God was. I had no clue. Somebody said something about Pentecostal. I was like, I don't know what that is. And so I go to church with him, and he finally gets me to go. And he felt like he had a calling to be a preacher at the time. And so he was, really just kind of focused on that. But, I mean, we were still young idiots, I guess, doing stupid stuff, But he invited me to go to church, and so I go to church, and it's like this whole completely different environment from what I grew up in, in the Baptist church where we sing hymns, and it's very calm, and it's just very structured. It's just like nobody raises their hand, nobody does anything, nobody yells, nothing. You don't interrupt the pastor or anything. And so I go into the Church of God, and it's like people speaking in tongues, and I'm like, this is weird. I don't understand this at all, but it was interesting. I was like, I don't know. There's something about it. It just felt, I guess, sort of real raw, maybe a little bit more so. It didn't feel like you had to be as conservative, I guess, as I felt like I needed to be in the Baptist church that I grew up with. So it had a big impact on me, I felt like, for my journey. And then as I remember, I started getting more involved and going to youth group. We had a really cool youth pastor at the time, and he would take us out, and we would have a lot of fellowship time, and it was really great. And it was like one Monday, I think it was a Monday night, if I remember right. We went to a different church, and for like a meeting or something like that. And they, of course, being Pentecostal, they did the laying on hands and things like that, or laying hands on people and stuff like that. And you'd see people falling out in the aisles, and I was like, man, that doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand that. I didn't understand it at all, but I certainly believed it. And when I heard the pastor, he preached generally the same message that I had heard growing up. And so it still resonated with me, and I was like, there's just something different. Well, we went to that church that one night, and somebody laid their hands on me, and I just fell out. And I still to this day don't understand like what happened. It's not like I just succumbed to anything. I don't know. I just kind of just fell backwards, and there were people there to catch me, and I was out for a little while, and then I came back, and I was like, what happened? And everybody's like, that was cool. But I was like, I thought maybe I was just, I don't know. I still to this day, I don't understand it. And so, but looking back, I just really felt like it was a spiritual moment. I feel like there was something, the Holy Spirit, something that I just could never shake. And so that coupled with that feeling of when I know I was saved on those steps back when I was 11 years old, it was just some sort of peace that I've never, again, those are the two moments in my life where I've just felt like I was in the presence of something else. And so both of those two moments are very, very big in my mind that I'll never be able to shake and never be able to forget. And I think that's sort of what kept me or never let me get too far away from God, was those two moments. So going into, finishing up high school, best friend, he ends up going to another high school, and I finish up. And at this point, I had taken aircraft maintenance my last 2 years of high school, and I'd really gotten into airplanes and thought aviation was a really cool career field. And I was like, I really want to be a pilot. I don't know exactly where that came from. I guess, again, just maybe taking aircraft maintenance. I was originally going to go take metal fabrication, but it was going to be the first year of my 11th grade year that they were going to offer aircraft maintenance. And I was like, that sounds way cooler. I get to work on airplanes. So I did that my junior and senior year, and it was a lot of fun. And it just kind of sparked something in me. I was like, I like airplanes. Well, my dad, when I graduated high school, he was like, well, you can get your pilot's license. And so he let me go get my pilot's license when I graduated high school. So I got my pilot's license. It took about a year. Shouldn't have taken that long. Whole nother story. But in any case, in 2000, I ended up finally getting my pilot's license. I met my, who is my wife now, Rachel. She was just 15, I think, when I met her. I had just graduated high school, so I think I just turned 18. And that would have been in like just before 2000. So it was like December of 99, I think, when I met her. I graduated in the summer of 1999. And so I met her, we started dating, and we're still together, so it worked out. But, so at that point, again, God wasn't really much in the story much, but now I've sort of got this dream of like, I want to be a pilot and stuff like that. And so I tried to go to college, and that wasn't the thing. Well, I think it would have been in later on, it would have been 2001. Yeah. In 2001, Rachel gets pregnant. So we're getting ready to have our first son. And, again, I'm probably I'd have been 19, I think, 19 then. Rachel was 17 when she had Caleb. And, we're trying to figure out, and I'm just, again, I'm thinking back as I think of how young my parents were, of like, I don't know how they did as good as they did, but I didn't do it nearly as good as they did first. I was not very, I wasn't ready to be a dad by any means. And, but, as soon as we had our son, everything changed. I was like, wow, this is something different. And so later on that year, Rachel and I, we both were believers, but church wasn't a priority. I went to church with her a few times. Her parents went to church, and so again, but I didn't care. I was more preoccupied with other things, and so we were just out having a good time partying, and now she ends up pregnant, and so we're having a kid, and now she's got to grow up because she has no choice, and I'm still wanting to go have a good time, and so I wasn't a very good person at the time, but I did want to support my family. And so I'm trying to figure this out. I'm like, I want to be a pilot. I want to go to college, but I can't afford it. So what am I going to do? So it was my birthday of 2022, I think. Would that have been right? Yeah. No, 23. I think it was. Yeah. May of 2023. Now Caleb, he's just been born back in September of 2022. So he's maybe 4 or 5 months old.
You mean 2002?
2002, sorry, yeah, 2002. Okay. So he was born in 2002, so now we're in May of 2003, and I'm like trying to figure out like how I'm going to take care of my family. And I'm just working jobs here and there, just scraping by as best as I can. And me and Rachel's relationship's not that great anymore. And so it's my birthday of 2003 in April. We had an air show coming to town, and I don't think there ever has been one before. I don't remember one growing up, and I don't think there's ever been one since, but the U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds were coming to town. And it was just like this one day. It was a Saturday. It was my birthday. And I think Rachel got tickets or something. We ended up going to the air show that day, and I told her, I was like, man, I think I just want to go to the military. It wasn't really what I wanted to do, but it was the only path I could see to like take care of my family and be able to go to college. And I'm 20 or 21 at this point, and I have no future, really. I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to support my family. So Rachel's like, no, you're not joining the military because I'm not going with you if you do. And so I'm like, well, I'm not leaving. I'm not going to leave my son. And I didn't want to leave her either, but we go to this air show, and we see the U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds that day. And I don't know what happened. I like to say this is a recruiting video for the Air Force because it works, but we went and saw the Thunderbirds, and she's like, okay, you can join the Air Force. And I called the recruiter on Monday and went, I think this would have been, it was April 26th of 2003. We got married a month later, May 27th of 2003. We had been engaged for a little bit, but I went to the recruiter, and the recruiter's like, you can't join the military because you have a son and you're not married. I don't know the rules behind it, still don't to this day, but he said I can't join the military unless we got married or I signed over rights to him. And I was like, well, I'm not going to sign over my rights to. I'm not going to do that because this just didn't feel right to me. But again, we were engaged. He's like, well, why don't you guys get married? And we looked at each other and we were like, yeah, well, okay, I guess why not? So we got married a month later. And then we ended up having, we thought I was going to leave and go in the military really, really quick. We're like, I'm going to get married and then I'm going to leave and I'm going to go to basic training. And so we planned, we just kind of got a wedding real quick. We found a minister who would do it for us and then would legally marry us, but then do our ceremony a couple weeks later because we thought, we didn't have time to put a ceremony together. And I really wanted to get married in the church, and so did Rachel. But legally, I had to have the paperwork to take to the Air Force and say I could go ahead and go enlist. So May 27th, we got married. I went to enlist the very next day, I think, if I remember right. And then to come to find out, I didn't get to go for 9 months after that. So I had to wait another 9 months. So February 2004 is when I joined the military and left. And so now married with our youngest son, who's not quite young, or did he turn? Yeah, he just turned 1. Or no, not quite young, not quite 1 yet. And I leave to go to the military, and it would have been May of 2004. Rachel, I was down in Mississippi for tech school. I was learning to be an air traffic controller in the Air Force, and so graduated basic training and gone off to Mississippi for training to learn to be an air traffic controller. And I had to call her. That was the day I found out where we were going to go. That's where we're going to get stationed at, where we're going to get based at. And I remember telling the recruiter, I said, I don't care where in the world I get to go as long as it's not North Dakota. And I got Grand Forks, North Dakota was my first base. And so I don't think it was meant to be that way, but I don't know. In the end, God was in it 100%. I wholeheartedly believe that we went there for us, for Rachel and I. I had to call her on our anniversary, 1 year anniversary, May 2004, May 27th, and tell her that we're going to Grand Forks, North Dakota, and she cried. So I made her cry on our first anniversary, which was terrible. But like I said, in the end, we ended up going up there. She was young, and she didn't want to leave home. She didn't want to leave her mom, and I don't blame her. But it was the best thing that ever could have happened to us, because when we were young and trying to figure out marriage and life as a married couple, being away from family and not being able to run back to mom and dad, and same thing for me, not being able to go back to mom and dad, was the best thing that could ever happen for our marriage, because we had to turn to each other when we didn't want to. We didn't want to. We would fight and we just couldn't run away. We'd have to go in another room and then make up. And so in the end, we ended up growing so much out of that, being gone to North Dakota. So I know, looking back, that God did that for a reason. It wasn't just because I said I didn't want to go there. I just think it's funny. But North Dakota, there for 4.5 years, and everything's going pretty good. But again, I just remember being there, and we weren't going to church. We were just partying, having a good time, living the military lifestyle. And I would call my grandparents, and my grandmother would be like, "Hey, you find a church?" And I'm like, "Yeah, Grandma, sure. I'll see if I can find a church." And we never did. There was not anything. It wasn't even in the front of our head at all. And I get deployed to Iraq in 2007, and come back. And what happens when you come back from a deployment? Well, 9 times out of 10, you have another baby, and that's what happens. So we ended up having Elijah in 2008. And at this point, now I got 2 kids, and I'm like, well, I was thinking about getting out of the military, but then I was like, we're going to have 2 kids. I can't. So I ended up re-enlisting, and I knew if I re-enlisted, I was going to stay for the whole 20 years. So we're in North Dakota. We get orders to go to Georgia. I go down to Georgia. We go to Warner Robins, Georgia in 2009, and we end up having, it's actually, we decided we were going to buy a house. And the day before we closed on it, it would have been Sunday, Rachel takes a pregnancy test, and we find out we're having number 3. And we're just getting ready to close the very next day on a 3-bedroom house. And we're like, this is interesting. So take it back just a little bit. When we had Caleb, we had him younger. Well, there was 5 or 6 years before we had Elijah, and Rachel had some ovarian cysts. She had to have one of her ovaries removed. And so we didn't think she was going to be able to have any more kids. Well, then we had two back to back, 15 months apart. So she was fixed. So now we just bought a house, and we got three kids. So we got three kids now. But again, we really just, church wasn't much of a focus, at all. And so I ended up getting orders to go to Korea for a year in 2000. What I left in 2011 or 12, I think it was. So we go to Warner Robins, Georgia, thinking that we had been in North Dakota for 4.5 years. I go to Georgia, and I'm like, I'm going to be here for a while. I'd only been there for just under 2 years, and I got the assignment to go to Korea. And Korea was unaccompanied, meaning you couldn't take your family with you. And so that was kind of scary. It's like 12 months without being with your family. I had done a deployment to Iraq, just once, and there's a couple little times here and there where I had to leave my family. But this was the real deal, where I was going to be gone for a long period of time, and you can come back halfway through for just 1 month, but outside of that, you're gone. And it was the worst year of my entire life. I look back on it, and I did a lot of stupid things that I think it was just kind of coping with being gone, maybe, I don't know. The culture there is just drink. Everybody there, nobody's family's there. There's no kids. Nobody has responsibilities of family. So you just drink. And when I first got there, I didn't drink much, here and there, but it wasn't anything crazy. Well, I come back home on mid-tour of that summer of 2012 or 2013, and we have a good time, but it was tough because I come back knowing I got to leave to go back to Korea again, and so I'm sort of in this mindset of like, I don't want to get back connected to the family because I know I'm just going to have to leave again. And so I probably wasn't just there because I knew I was going to have to leave again. And maybe that was my defense mechanism. I'm not sure. I'm just trying to deal with it. So we have a good time. We go on vacation, all that stuff. But then I leave to go back to Korea, and I'm just in this massive state of depression. Like, I just want to be with my family. I'm like, I can't believe I'm having to leave again. I'm going to be gone for another 4 or 5 months. And it just was hard. And so I go back, and somebody knocks on the door. You want to go drinking? I'm like, yeah, why not? And it just started this path of just drinking way, way, way too much, and just that became my priority. Well, my grandfather ended up passing away while I'm there. And of course, what I'm going to do is go drink some more. And it really, really strained mine and Rachel's relationship to the point where I don't know how we're still married today. She's amazing that she stayed with me. But somehow I make it through Korea. Come back, and now we're going to end up moving to South Carolina, which is closer to home. So that seems like it's going to be good, and so, but we're still just on really shaky ground in our marriage, trying to recover from that year. And in that time, Rachel also had a miscarriage right after I'd come back or gone back to Korea. She had a miscarriage, and she was trying to deal with that. And I still kind of struggle with this a lot, where when she told me she was pregnant, I didn't want to have another kid. And so if I'm being honest, I was sort of relieved when she had the miscarriage, and I still struggle with that. I don't know that's how I was supposed to feel. And I think she sensed that as well. And that added even more stress to our marriage. And so it's just hard, just kind of dealing with that stuff. Well, we get to South Carolina, and everything starts to smooth out, like we kind of working everything out, and I started to feel like I needed to go to church. And I think Rachel we kind of had it at the same time. We just started feeling this pull, like we need something else. There was just something missing from our life and from our marriage, and just in general, like we didn't need for anything. We didn't really, of course you always want for stuff. We didn't really need for anything, but there was just something missing. And so I think, again, about the same time, we were like, we just need to go to church. So we started to go to church a little bit. This has been the first time we really start going to church. And like I said, my grandfather had just passed away. Well, I think it was that next year that I'd just gotten back when my grandmother passed away. And those were the two grandparents that I grew up with who had been very influential in me going to church and stuff like that. And so maybe that was part of it. I don't know. But we did start going to church, but my excuse was always like, we're going to leave again. I'm in the military. I didn't want to get too connected or involved in a church. It was sort of my excuse. It's like, I don't want to get involved because I know I'm just going to leave again. So we'd go on Easter. We'd go, maybe for a month or something, and we'd stop. And, so it just wasn't it was not a priority by any means. Still drinking a little bit here and there, not as much, because I thought I about killed myself when I was in Korea. I was like, I don't need to do that anymore. I didn't want to, bring any more stress into our family that I didn't need to. But in any case, we go through there, and then I ended up getting an assignment to go to Africa for a year. We ended up actually, well, take it back just a little bit before that, we ended up having another son. We had Noah, our youngest now, who's 9, getting ready to turn 10. But I ended up getting an assignment to go to Greenland. I'm sorry, not Greenland, but Africa. And so I go to Africa, and Noah's only like 5 months old when I leave. And so that was tough on Rachel. She's got 4 boys she's trying to take care of. And then I'm going to Africa for like 5 months, I think. And I couldn't tell her where I was going. She didn't know. It was a secret assignment. And I was like, I'm just going. I can't tell you anything. Sorry. And that was stressful. And so she knew I was going somewhere that probably wasn't good. So she's dealing with that. She's dealing with the kids. And it was just hard again, But in that time, I think we were sort of getting better. We were growing. And, we'd had our youngest kid who we did not expect to have. We didn't think we were going to have any more kids by any means, because I think he's 9, and then Gabriel's 15, so 5-6 years between kids again, and so we didn't think we were going to have any more. So he was a little miracle, I guess. And again, I go back and I think of like that time in Korea where I was sort of glad that we didn't have a kid, and when we were getting ready to have Noah, I was very nervous about having a kid. I was like, I don't know how we're going to afford it. Being a guy, I'm thinking, I say logically, but I don't think it's really logical. But I'm thinking of, like, how am I going to support the kid and stuff like that. And so we have Noah, and he's just been the best blessing to us. He was the kid we didn't even know we needed, and he's just been awesome for us. And so that was one of God's many blessings. All of our kids are blessings for sure, but that one was just out of the blue. We weren't expecting it. And we thought for sure we were done, and so we ended up having him. Well, you get there when we're in South Carolina, and I go on that deployment to Africa. I come back, and I've now got an assignment to come up here to Virginia. And so we ended up moving up to Virginia in 2017, and it was about that time my oldest son says, I don't believe in God. And that was like a kick to the face, chest, everything. I mean, just like, I just felt like a complete and total failure as a parent. And he still has that same stance, but it changed me. It really did. It was like, well, there's a reason why he doesn't believe in God. Maybe I failed as a parent, but also I haven't been living the life I should be. And so I really think when I look back, God used that moment to really shift our thought process and my thought process. So I move up to Virginia, and I figure out a way to where I can start flying again. I'm like, I'm starting to see a path where I can make flying a career. I joined the Air Force. I wanted to fly, but I knew I couldn't because I wasn't an officer. I didn't have a college degree. And so I picked air traffic control, which is the closest thing I think of. And so that's why I did that. Well, I hadn't been getting my degree through the military, and so I'd finally got my bachelor's degree, but I didn't see a path toward being able to fly. I figured out a way using my GI Bill to start being able to fly. And so I started flying. This is in 2017, I think, or 18. I start flying and start working towards that goal. And I'm like, wow, this is really cool. Maybe this really is what God's got planned for me, is to go do this. So we're still thinking about church. We're not going again. It's not a priority by any means. And so the priority now is I want to fly. I've seen that path, and I'm driven. I'm like, I just want to go do that. And so I start flying a lot and go through and get all my license and become a flight instructor. And worked my butt off. It was hard. It's one of the hardest things I ever done to become a flight instructor. And so, but now I'm like, this is sort of, my dreams are being realized a little bit. Like I'm a professional pilot, if you will. I'm getting paid to fly. And so I'm working, as a part-time flight instructor. I just finished my degree. I'm a part-time flight instructor, full-time Air Force. And so I'm gone a lot, just flying, trying to build up hours to thinking like when I retire, that's what I want to do. I want to be an airline pilot. Well, I'm flying for like a year as a flight instructor, and I get another assignment to go to Greenland for a year. And so I think me and Rachel both were freaking out a little bit. It's another remote assignment. And this was one I volunteered for. I didn't volunteer to go to Korea, but I volunteered for this one. And I did it because I knew I kind of wanted to take things into my own hands. I applied to go because I knew that if I didn't, they might send me back to Korea. And I knew that if I went back to Korea, it was not going to be good. So I asked to go to Greenland. Well, I found out I was going to get to come back to Virginia after this year in Greenland. So at that point, I'm like, well, there's not really, and I knew at the end of that I was going to pretty much be right at retirement. And so we're like, well, let's see if we can buy a house because we know we're going to need to come back here. So we start looking at buying a house. This was in late 2019. And I was supposed to leave to go to Greenland in April of 2020. And so we kind of hit up and we're renting a house and we're like starting to look for houses and things like that. And so at this point, I'm like, well, that excuse for not going to church is not there anymore because we know I'm coming back here. And I can't use the excuse of, well, I know I'm probably just going to move and I can't get connected. And so that excuse is kind of out the window. And I look back and I think that was God again. That's why he did what he did, because now he knew he could remove that excuse from me going back to church and getting involved in a church. And so I look at it and I'm like, well, we start looking for a house. And I think it was that Christmas of 2019, we got a flyer in the mail from Liberty Life Church. And it was like the Christmas service. And I'm like, well, that's an opportunity. We got to go. I'd been wanting to go to a Christmas service. And so we go and we really like it. And we're like, I think this is going to be our church home. So we kind of go sporadically a little bit. I know I'm getting ready to go to Greenland and, kind of getting ready for that, the holidays and things like that. And we're looking for a house. And so we find a house, I think in February. We put an offer on it, falls through. And about this time, this little thing called COVID, starting to hear some stuff about this. And we're like, what is this? Sounds like flu or something. No big deal. Don't think anything of it. Well, we find this other house that just kind of pops up, and we're like, yeah, we're going to see if we can get that house. And we go through and put an offer in. Everything gets approved. And this was in, again, I think February, March of 2020. Everything's starting to close down, just getting ready to shut down for COVID. And we didn't know what was going on. I don't think anybody did. And we thought we were going to lose the house. There was some stuff that needed to get done, like I needed to get a roof put on it, is what it was. And we had used all of our money basically to try to get this house. We had worked with the sellers to try to get some things fixed. They had done a lot. And in the end, they were like, we can't do any more. And so basically they were like, the VA comes in, we're getting a VA loan, and they said, you got to put a roof on the house before we would give you a loan. And we're like, man, we just lost the house. There's no way we're going to get this house. I can't afford to get it. There's no way. Only thing I knew to do was pray. And at that point, I just got to the point where I was like, God, if this is your will, please let us get this house, And it's the first time I ever really remember God I know beyond a shadow of doubt he answered the prayer. Like, I really just was at a point where I didn't know where else to turn, is turn to God. And it may seem silly, but to me it was a big deal, because we'd spent a lot of money. I'm getting ready to go to Greenland for a year and kind of like stressing out. Now the COVID stuff's happening. I'm like, what is going on? And we're like at the finish line of buying this house and it's about to fall through. And I just prayed. And we wrote a letter to the sellers, and I said, this is all the money I got. I got enough money to pay for half the roof if you'll cover the other half. And they agreed to it. Mm-hmm. And God answered our prayer, and we got our house. And then I left, and I was supposed to leave in April, ended up leaving in May. Everything got delayed about a month, and ended up going to Greenland for a year. And I told myself before I went, I was like, I will not drink. I shall not drink when I go to Greenland. Or at least, I had not said I'm never going to drink again, but I was like, I'm not going to do it like I did last time. And so I get to Greenland, and I remember taking my Bible with me. I don't really know why I did. I think maybe just I felt like I needed to take it. I was going to be gone for a year. I took my Bible with me. And we go in and get there, and like I said, COVID had happened, and so when we got there, we had to quarantine for 2 weeks. And so basically we go in, you quarantine for 2 weeks, and you're stuck in your room. And so I get there, and I'm just in my room for 2 weeks. I got nothing to do, So hanging out, pondering life and stuff like that, and start flipping through the Bible a little bit here and there. Not much, but I'm just in the back of my head. It's like, I just felt like God was doing something. So finally get out of quarantine, and we go and we have this thing called, I called it Arctic Start, but it's kind of like a right start briefing. So all the newcomers come in, and they come into a room, and the base commanders, everybody comes in, introduces themselves and stuff like that. And they would go around the room, and we all knew going to Greenland that you would have a lot of downtime. The mission was not super, super busy. It was very, very remote. I mean, we're so far north that you couldn't even see the northern lights because the northern lights would be south of you. That's how far north you are.
Wow.
So when I worked in the control tower, we would look to I think it would have been to our east, and that was the polar ice cap. So we were kind of almost above the polar ice cap to some degree. It's crazy, but it was really cool. But so we had a lot of downtime while we're there, and so they would go around and be like, "What are you going to do with this year?" You know, and in my head, I brought my guitar with me. I'm like, "I'm gonna play the guitar," you know. Maybe read a book or something. I hadn't really figured out exactly what I was going to do, but they go around the room, and this one guy stands up and he says, I want to read the Bible in the whole year, you know, this year. I want to read the whole Bible. And I was like, that's what I'm going to do. That's exactly what I'm going to do. I brought my Bible, I had it, and I ended up doing it 3 months, and I probably read it twice the whole time I was there. But it wasn't long after that I found out I didn't get promoted again, and I was just devastated. I was like, how can this be happening again? I'd been trying to get promoted, and it just wasn't working out. And so I think it was, again, trying to get closer to God. I started watching some sermons and stuff on YouTube and stuff like that. And also I wanted to make sure I watched the sermon back here at church, back here in Virginia, so I could sort of stay connected to the local church as best as I could. And I had watched a sermon by Greg Groeschel. It was called A Purpose in Your Pain. And it was right after I'd found out I didn't get promoted. And I was just like, God, how can this be happening? I was mad, lack of a better term. I was just mad, almost mad at God to some degree. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. You know, I don't understand it. You know, and at that point, 9 times out of 10, in the past, I probably would have went and drank or just kind of cut it off or whatever. But for some reason, I just opened my Bible and I was like, I'm gonna study the Bible a little bit. I watched that sermon, and again, it was Purpose in Your Pain, and I still have the notes of everything I went through there. And it was just a moment where I was like, God's telling me something. It's like there's a purpose, there's a reason behind this. And so like a couple weeks later, I was like, I want to go to the chapel and get involved in the church or the chapel. It's not really a church on base. It's like super, super small. Not much bigger than this house. This first floor of your house here was our chapel. It was tiny, but you know, I'd gone and I'd heard that the chaplain who was there was getting ready to leave. Well, now I had that excuse not to go again. Well, I don't want to go because, you know, they're getting ready to leave or whatever. So I think it was Memorial Day. I think they were having a celebration on base, and I go to this thing, and this guy gets out of the truck, and I'm wearing a Clemson hoodie. And he was like, "Oh, Clemson, huh?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And so he kind of struck up a conversation. Turns out he went to, he had grown up or not grown up, he'd gone to college in my hometown of Greenville, South Carolina. He had gone to Bob Jones University, and so we kind of had the connection, and he was like, "I'm the chaplain," and I was like, okay, you know. So he ends up sitting down next to me at dinner, and we chit-chat back and forth, and I was like, what time service on Sunday? And he was like 11 o'clock or something like that. So I ended up going and getting involved, and it was around that time I was like, what am I going to do with this year? You know, of course I want to read the Bible, but I was like, I really want to get into so I want to figure some more God stuff out. And so I was like, well, I'll take some theology courses or something online. And I was like, well, why don't I get some college credit for it if I'm going to do it? You know, so I hit up Liberty University. I had been going through them through the aviation program, and I was like, I already have a bachelor's degree. Can I just work on a master's of divinity? And I was like, there's no way they're gonna think I'm an idiot. You know, I'd never taken a Bible college class ever. I knew very little about the Bible at all. No way they're gonna accept me to a master's degree program. It made no sense. I don't even know why I did it. So I called them up. I was like, hey, I want to take some master's classes in theology. And they're like, well, you got to apply. I'm like, okay, whatever. You know, I was like, this no way. I was accepted in like 3 days. It made no sense to me. And I was like, well, okay, you know, maybe God's pointing me somewhere. I don't know. And it was funny because I had to get a pastoral recommendation to be able to even be able to accept it to it. And I was like, I was not super involved in the church back here, didn't know really the pastors at all. And so I didn't feel like it would be appropriate for me to ask them. And I don't know why I felt like it was appropriate to ask the chaplain on base, but I was like, hey, can I have a pastoral recommendation? He was like, yeah, sure. And so I was like, okay. So again, it might have been like a week that I had applied and got accepted. But since I was already, had been in the system and taken classes recently, I think that made it move faster. I think if they would have known the whole story, they might not have accepted it. But in the end, I ended up taking, I think, like 20 credit hours throughout that year towards my Master's of Divinity. And in that year, that chaplain really just poured into me, and there was a couple of us who maybe felt like we had a call to ministry. And it was the most transformative year of my life. I mean, I just really felt like God was working in me. I had a lot of time just to focus on Him. And in the end, it was the hardest thing to leave those guys, because it was just, we had gotten really tight. We'd have Bible study on Tuesday nights. And just throughout that year, again, the contrast between that and the year in Korea was this was the year where God pulled me to Him. And Rachel and I really grew together. It was odd that in that year in Korea, how we had grown apart and just how alcohol had kind of pulled us apart. But in a year of being gone, putting God in it had grown us back together. We'd actually gotten closer in that year, I think, because we had God in the middle of it all. We'd even do some Bible studies over FaceTime or whatever video thing was at the time. I can't remember. And so it was just a great time of the year. And I come back home on mid-tour this time, and it's around Christmas time, and we go to church service, and I think my kids and my wife, they were kind of like, who is this guy? This is a really weird guy. We don't not like him, but it's just different. And it had been, that 5 or 6 months or whatever of just spending time with God where it just changed me. And so I think it was hard for them a little bit to get that, but I was just focused. I was like, this is it. This is the most important thing that there is. And so really, I'm getting ready to go back to finish up my time in Greenland, and we have 21 days of prayer in January. It would have been January of 21, I think. And I had never done a 21 days of prayer ever. And so I told Rachel, I was like, I really want to do this. Will you do it with me? And she was like, yeah. And so we did, and it was the greatest thing that ever did. I only got to do 2 weeks, but when I went back, I watched every single day, and she kept going for that last week, even though we weren't able to go together. And it was just one of the best things that had ever happened. And from that point on, we've just been solely focused. I came back from Greenland and got accepted to the school ministry at Liberty and just really got involved in the church. And still my kids don't like maybe the new me. They like the good parts of it, but the kind of being focused on church is just hard for them maybe to grasp, but it's just how God worked in my life. And so that's kind of the testimony in a nutshell of how God just always kind of was there. He was always there in those moments. And as I look back, I didn't realize it. I look back at all those little moments of where I knew I wasn't connected to God, but He was always there. And how everything was just, a lot of people might say it's just chance or happenstance that all these things happened and the way it worked out. And I just know there's no way that things could work out the way they did if God wasn't in it. And so I just see that in all those little moments. And there's many more of just where God was always there, waiting on me to get to the right time. If I'd have done it earlier, maybe I wouldn't have stuck with it, but He found me right when I needed to be found and kept me around long enough, thank Him, that He did keep me around long enough to get to that point where it's just been the greatest thing that's ever happened, is just getting closer to Him. And it's a daily struggle, and it gets harder every single day. I think every day is a little bit harder than the last to some degree, but it's a good kind of hard, it's just different. And I go back and think of like one of the things, I mentioned this a second ago, like just before I went to Greenland, like I said, I was flight instructing and I had everything before me, and I was like, I just remember, like, I thought I had everything, like I'm working towards my dream, I've got an awesome family. I've got 4 beautiful kids, an awesome wife, we've got our house, or we're getting ready to have a house, all these things. And I just felt so empty. It was like, I remember telling Rachel, I was like, I should have everything, but I'm working really hard. And I was like, well, maybe I'm just working too hard. Maybe that's what it is. But again, I go back and look, I know it's just, I was missing God. That was the one thing that was really missing. So when I come back, I start back flight instructing, and I'm doing the school of ministry and being involved in the church and stuff like that. And eventually I did realize my dream at the end of retiring last year. I realized my dream of going to the airlines. But I remember like getting done with training with the airlines, and I'm like, that's it. This is it. I worked so hard for all this, really, really hard, and I had God in my life at this point, but like it just still felt like it's not right. Something's wrong. Something's not right here. I'm working for an airline, getting ready to go be an actual first officer for an airline, and I did, and I go through training, and I'm out there, and I'm like, this is just wrong. This doesn't feel right. Something's not right. I'm like, it doesn't make any sense. I'm still trying to make sense of it. But I know God's working, and so thankfully through all those trials and things like that, I can look back and see that God was in it in every moment. And even though I'm struggling right now trying to figure out like what the next step is for me, even though like I'm thankful that I figured out pretty early on that the airlines was not the job for me. Being gone from family and stuff like that was not what I wanted to do. Did it for 6 months, and I was like, that's not it. This is not right. It's not where God wants me right now. And I'm thankful I'm sensitive to that, instead of waiting 5 years to figure that out or whatever the case may be. I figured it out pretty quick. And so, but I realized my dream, and so I think that was kind of it. I think as I look back, I was telling somebody the other day, I was like, I don't understand why God would provide me the opportunity to do all these things. And because I really look back and I'm like, he gave me the opportunity to go fly. He gave me the opportunity to realize my dream. But I think, as I really look at it, I think God allowed me to realize my dream to show me that it wasn't my dream. It wasn't about me. It's about him. And it's about what he wants. And so when I realized my dream, he was like, okay, you did it. You're welcome. I answered your prayer. But now on to the next thing, And so we'll see what he's got. But yeah, that's kind of it.
Man, praise God. What another great testimony. My name is Caleb Hurley. This is the Jesus Shift podcast. We've got new testimonies every single week. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment something that God has done in your life. God bless and have a great rest of your day.